Hello, and welcome to yet another installment of In the Foyer, the companion sort of podcast video thing to our sermon series as we go through the Old Testament. This is episode 4. Yes. As you can see, I am not joined with Ryan today, as he is on vacation.
Nor are we in the foyer.
Nor are we in the foyer. We are in our apartment, and I am joined by my lovely and intelligent wife, Shonda, who will be asking me questions about my sermon. You are also an avid listener to this thing that we do.
This series, yeah, I might be one of your listeners.
Okay.
Thus far.
Well,
maybe I'll share this one, and
because you're in it.
Because I'm in it. Anyways,
so she will be the one asking me questions. I will talk, and yeah, hopefully this will go up. I'll upload this tomorrow, and yeah, so yeah.
Okay. Well, with that riveting introduction, so let's talk about Okay, so dear, let's talk about your sermon on Sunday. So the first question is, what did we talk about?
What did we talk about? Well, we talked about the Exodus, and specifically the event where God splits open the sea, well, the big lake in northern Egypt, and brings the Israelites through dry land, and then basically kind of not forces, but like gets the Egyptians to follow them, and then he brings the lake back in on the Egyptians, and they all perish. And he saves Israel from slavery, brings them to the start of the journey to the promised land. He had promised Abraham all those years ago. This story really is like it's a continuation and completion of, well, not a completion, a continuation of the original covenant that God made with Abraham in Genesis 14. So, yes. We jumped ahead a lot in the text for this to talk about, particularly we wanted to talk about prophets and where the prophetic house kind of started, which is Moses. And he is considered by both Old Testament writers, New Testament writers, and a whole bunch of scholars, and pretty much scholars like throughout history, going back to the times of the Old Testament times. He was considered the greatest of the prophets and the first of the prophets. So that is why we chose him for prophet. And this is a really good text to talk about the prophetic, in that it was God acted through a person in an incredible power, an incredible way, and Moses brought forth a message from God. So it was kind of all of it in one. That's what we talked about, among other things.
Excellent. So then what didn't we talk about, Galen?
A lot of things. This was a really hard text to preach. I kind of wish I gave this one to Ryan, but he's away, so I got it. What didn't we talk about? There was one thing I really wanted to talk about, but I had no idea how to make it into a sermon, which is the baptism imagery that you can pull out of the New Testament. Because so in the New Testament, we have baptism become a thing where you go through the waters and come out a new person. And that is a callback to Exodus 14, where they pass through the waters. Their old self dies, so to speak. Their slave self dies.
They're slaves to, they were slaves, and
they were slaves to the Egyptians.
To sin.
So like the idea is like they were slaves to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
They go through the waters and now they're no longer slaves.
Mhm.
In the same way, we pass through baptism, the
Yeah.
waters of baptism, and are no longer slaves to sin.
Yeah.
And I could have talked a lot about that and how that's a powerful moment and a powerful image. And I wanted to, but I really wasn't sure how to make it work in
Yeah.
the moment.
Well, yeah, I'm going with your Old Testament overview. Like, you're not trying to talk too much about the New Testament.
Yeah, I'm
Because
not
this is like a kind of
an arc.
story arc.
Yeah,
So, but that's cool. I don't think I had thought about it that way, or if I had, I've forgotten.
Yeah.
So I did not make that connection.
no. And most people don't. Most people just kind of go, oh yeah, baptism is the thing.
Yeah.
And then they're just kind of separate, except a lot of things are not separate in scripture. And that's the other thing is like, it's why part of the reason we're doing this series is because the Old Testament is like the New Testament is so linked to the Old Testament,
Mhm.
the First Testament. And so, yeah, like this baptism imagery that we see in the New Testament is absolutely linked to the Exodus and all of that. What else didn't we talk about? What was other things?
You did talk about the faithfulness of God
I did talk about the faithfulness of God.
to the unfaithful Israelites.
Yes, that was
And
my
you-
main point.
And you briefly mentioned how like some of them might not have even been worshippers
Yeah,
of like the Hebrew God, or
yeah,
they
and
might
I,
not have known, because it's been 400 years, and usually like being assimilated into another culture like that, you also like adopt
that practice.
their practices and their religion.
Yeah.
And you see that like all across a lot of human history, which is why it's so unique and remarkable that that God is faithful, but also that they were able to keep kind of I don't want to use the word remnant, faithful remnant, but they were able to keep like a little bit of that faith alive, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think if I had talked more, if we had gone into the plagues, I probably would have talked more about that.
yeah.
Because like the cool thing with the plagues is that it's kind of like God's killing an Egyptian god with each one of the plagues.
Yeah, because each one like corresponds to a different.
Yeah, and then the
God.
final one where it's darkness is putting out Ra, which is the sun of God. So it's,
Yeah.
I probably would have talked more about that there. And I think it was an offhanded comment that like I said that I don't even think was in my notes, where I was like, yeah, like they might not have even been worshippers of Yahweh, but
Yeah. And so that was just kind of God saying, like, no, I am the true God.
I am the true God. I am faithful to you, and I will bring you out of Egypt. And we're still under the covenant. And it's why Abraham didn't go through the pieces, because no one's ever faithful.
Yeah, because humans can't be faithful in the way that God is, because God is perfect and humans are imperfect. And that's also why it's so remarkable that God walks through it, because he's basically guaranteeing like, I'm going to uphold my end, and then he even takes the punishment for humanity later on, like with Christ being like killed, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very powerful. It's just, yeah, so
it's just God taking on himself like the full brunt of this covenant and this agreement with humanity.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't talk about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart.
I was just gonna say that. I didn't
see, we're on the same wavelength.
That's
why we're married.
Stuff. No, I didn't talk about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, and that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, because there's so much going on there.
Yeah, and so actually, like a little brief sermonette on that would just be like, so the thing with that is because people are like, oh, did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Did he make him?
Yeah, and like,
is that
unjust?
Is that unjust or
did
unethical?
Did he have a choice in it? And
yeah, and I think one of the things that it tells us about God, so is that it starts off. The first time it happens, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. The next time it happens, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. And it happens like that several times at the beginning of Exodus. And then eventually God starts to harden his heart.
Yeah.
And at the end, what the idea is that God gives us what we want. And if we want to harden our hearts, eventually God's just going to do it. Like, we're just going to be like, if we continue in disobedience,
Mm,
like God will just be like, okay, like
okay.
I'm gonna give you what you want, and then we go, no, we didn't want that, and he's like, why? That's how you've been acting.
Yeah.
That's what you've wanted this whole time. You've been hardening your heart this whole time, and now suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So the idea is that God's just giving Pharaoh what he wanted
Yeah.
because Pharaoh had so many chances,
Yeah.
and because that wasn't like the central point of the text, that's why I didn't go into
Yeah.
it in
If
the
you were
sermon.
going to talk about that, you probably would have used those several other
Yeah,
texts.
and I
But,
probably, if we
yeah.
were doing like an Exodus series, I definitely would have.
Mhm.
Like just purely on the book of Exodus, which
Yeah.
I'd love to do. But
I think I have heard like one sermon on like the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, and I think that was the explanation.
Yeah.
It was that like God was just kind of giving him like because he just kept refusing to do justice because he was benefiting from the service and
Yeah.
the slavery of the Hebrews. So he was benefiting from an unjust system.
Yeah.
And so he refused to like repent of that and let them go. And then he refused to kind of accept God as God because he would have been worshiping not only the Egyptian gods, but like as Pharaoh, he would have thought of himself as like
God, a
as
divine.
the morning and evening star, the divine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So yeah.
so he would I think that would just be like a completely foreign concept to him as Pharaoh. He would be like, what do you mean? Like I have a divine right. I am divine.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm divine. You can't. There's no one God over me. I'm
yeah.
just as divine as Ra, sort of idea. And
Yeah.
so he consistently hardened his heart to the point
Mhm.
where like God was like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
You know what? You're gonna harden your heart. I'll harden your heart, and I'll send you into the middle of a sea. Like,
Yeah.
see how that divinity works out for you, bud.
Oh
Like,
my gosh. Yeah.
yeah. And that's a really important thing to note, especially because it is one of those gotcha moments that some like angsty atheists will use where they'll be like, yeah, well, God sent Pharaoh to die. And I'm like, he chose it.
Well, yeah, he chose because he said, okay, fine, I'll let you go. And then he's like, oh man, but now I got no slaves.
Now I got no slaves. Got to go get those
Gotta
slaves
get them back. And
Yeah.
again, it was like it sounds, I guess it sounds really harsh to our modern senses that like all the Egyptians were destroyed, but they had been enslaving the Hebrews for
Hundreds of years.
like hundreds of years and doing horrible things to them.
Yeah. Well,
And
I mean, their
like,
entire society was based off of slavery, which
yeah.
God clearly in this moment renounces. That's
Yeah.
another thing I guess I could have talked
Oh, you
talked
could have
about.
talked about slavery and like
The
being
renunciation of slavery.
liberated.
Yeah, I could have definitely talked about that because
Yeah.
that was a common thing in segregation in the States and everywhere. But
Everywhere that there was slavery.
but specifically in the States where they were
Yeah.
like, you would hear this apparently like there's like in diaries of slave owners, they'd be like, yeah, they're singing about the Exodus. It's really good to see our slaves singing about Christian things. And it's like the slaves were singing about you as
Yeah.
Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that are like gonna leave, and they're like, God's gonna bring us out of this slavery.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I could have talked about that. That would have been a good one. I didn't even think about that until just now.
Yeah. Well, like I think that's not that it didn't exist in Canada, but I feel like that might land more on an American
Yeah, that would have been more of an American
audience. Maybe you could have found a way to do it with Indigenous.
Yeah,
people.
I probably
But-
could have, and that might have been better with all the stuff.
Yeah,
happening
not
now.
that Canada didn't participate in the slave trade because it did, but
Oh, it did.
but
we don't have it's not like as storied, I guess, as the segregation stuff in the States.
yeah,
We didn't have cotton farms.
yeah.
So
But that's definitely another theme that I've heard a lot of people talk about when they talk about this text is God
Liberation.
liberating slaves, and it was probably one of the texts that I forget the name for them now. Are they called abolitionists? They had a name.
that sounds right.
The people that were against
So,
slavery in the Civil War. I don't know much about American history because I'm Canadian. I don't think I even learned about the Civil War in my
no, I didn't either. I had to look it
School.
up.
yeah. So
We don't learn about that.
yeah, I did learn about residential schools though.
Yes.
And I also grew up in the Yukon, so. But that's a tangent. But anyway, but it's probably one of the texts that they would have used to defend their position of like God is anti-slavery.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the sad and scary thing is that there were Christians in the South defending
No, it's absolutely.
their right to own slaves and that it was good to own slaves and God was okay with it. And it was just so messed up.
And the terrifying thing about that is they use scripture for it.
And then, yeah, they used
It's
scripture.
why when someone says something is biblical, I always go like,
what do you mean by that?
do
Yeah.
you mean godly?
Yeah,
do you mean holy? Do you mean
godly,
Christ-like?
holy?
Because there's a lot
Yeah.
of things that are biblical that happened in the Bible that are not good.
That are not good things. Yeah. So.
Anyways.
Anyway.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I could have talked about, I guess, but I did not. I talked about righteousness and God's faithfulness.
Yeah, and it was still good.
Yes.
Yes. Shall we move on to
Sure.
the last question, which is, so why did we talk about what we talked about?
We talked about what we talked about, so like God's faithfulness, because I really want to hammer home, like one of the big things we want to hammer home in this series is God's faithfulness and humanity's kind of unfaithfulness.
Brokenness, yeah.
And brokenness. Because that's kind of the story of scripture.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you really want to like make it simple, which the Bible isn't, but
if you could really sum it up, I mean, it starts with Genesis.
It's
that same pattern, like over and over
and over again. People aren't good. People, we've talked about this a lot, where humanity is not inherently good, and it's like started off that way. They
just keep choosing themselves over God.
Yeah, over God and over each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's over and over again, people just choosing the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And God being like, I am faithful, I am faithful, I am faithful. And humanity being like, no. And this is a really good text to show the faithfulness of humanity alongside the faithfulness of God.
Well, at least the faithfulness of Moses.
The faithfulness of Moses.
Because the Hebrews complained.
Yes.
I mean, they did, and they were afraid, and you did say that in your sermon, that they didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, they were afraid.
And they're like, what you also could have mentioned was in the Hebrew imagination, like bodies of water.
Oh yeah.
Water is symbolic of chaos.
Right.
And that's why all the chaos monsters like live in the water, and I guess they just didn't like water. I mean, water
is untamable.
It's untamable. It is chaotic. It's, fluid. Like, you never know. You can't predict.
You don't know how deep it is. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
All sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So also the fact that like if they didn't know how to swim, like I don't know what. They probably didn't have swimming lessons in between slavery.
Nope. No, it's funny. Yeah, like we think sailors would have known how to swim. No, they didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's not even like you come up to a lake and you're like, okay, well,
at least we can swim.
Like, I can kind of swim or something maybe, but they come up and they're like, there is no way. Like, we don't have boats. There's no way that we can cross, and this is like a chaos lake. Yeah. There could be like monsters or things in there. Yeah, I don't know how deep it is. Like, we're basically like, water can very easily kill you. So yeah, they're stuck between this chaos element and their former enslavers
are like right on their tails,
bent on killing them or taking them back or both.
Yeah.
So and I thought you were going to mention that, but then you didn't. But that's okay. I think it's still pretty obvious even today.
Yeah.
Even today we have people who are afraid of swimming.
Yeah.
And of the water. Like,
yeah.
I'm not a very good swimmer. I still like to, you've seen me swim. I still like to swim. He was a swimmer
I was a varsity swimmer, so I know what I'm doing when I'm in the water.
Yeah. And yes, you are like a fish in the water, but
I know,
maybe you would have been fine.
So somebody like me, I'm like, oh, come on, guys, it's just a lake. You can cross that.
And you have swum across a lake.
Yes, I have. So like, I'm like, you could do it, but.
Yeah, but someone like me, who I just kind of doggy paddle, and float. I would have like doggy paddled and then floated on my back. And then That yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's still pretty obvious that
Yeah,
even
it's,
if that happened today, a
it's
large
still
crowd of
scary.
people would be like, there's no way.
there's no way. Yeah.
We
And
can
so
cross.
like it's a big scary thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like also like God splitting chaos and bringing order.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's like a repetition of
It's a repetition of
he
things.
splits the waters because he does that in Genesis.
Yes,
Where
and
he
makes the dry
splits
land.
The vault of because the
Yeah, 'cause
sky
he
the sky
separates
is
the waters
water.
and creates the dry land. That would
Yeah.
have been good.
That would hey. See, this is why you need me.
Huh. This is why I say she's smarter than me.
No.
Anyways, what were we talking about?
Food. Well, we're talking about. Well, that's what. Why did we talk about what we? I'm sorry. I am less structured than Ryan, so we go on a lot of tangents. I feel like when
Anyways.
you do this with Ryan, it's a lot more
It is a lot more.
streamlined.
It's okay.
But yeah. So why didn't we talk about those things?
Why? Because also because yeah, I really just wanted to highlight God's faithfulness. That would have been good.
It's okay.
Sometimes when you're writing a sermon, the things don't come to you until after. I also don't know if that would have been helpful or not for some people.
Yeah, I don't know. I think God being faithful is important though, especially for
Yeah.
our current climate
Yes.
with the pandemic and everything going on in the world.
Yeah.
And we are kind of surrounded by chaos, it
Yeah.
seems. So
And I mean, it also sets up for next week too, because then now, of course, the idea, of course, is we're going to be bouncing back between like they're good, and then now they're not so good, and they're good, and then they're not so good. So
yeah, because this was a good time.
yeah, this was good.
This is great. This is where the Prince of Egypt movie pretty much ends. If you've seen that, they go through the water, and then he gets the Ten Commandments at the last shot is him coming down.
With the Ten Commandments.
And then it ends, and it seems like it's happy, and then it's like, oh no, there's 40 more years.
40 years of wilderness,
garbage.
golden calves, and all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah.
So it's great. So we talked about that because it's a really good setup for the whole thing. It's mostly highlighting God's faithfulness.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yes, very good.
Very good. And that is all the questions.
Those are now normally the question that we ask last is how would you have preached it?
Oh,
You are
sorry.
not a-
How would I have preached it? Well,
you're not a pastor.
no. I don't know. I guess maybe I would have talked about that thing with Genesis and God creating
Probably.
order
Probably.
from chaos. Yeah, it was pretty cool. But I have no idea how to even preach. I could give like a talk. I could give a TED talk.
You could give a TED talk on.
I could give a
that.
presentation. I know how to. I could write you a paper. That's
Which is
what I do.
just as good.
It-
Just maybe not from the pulpit.
It's not as spiritually edifying maybe to others if I just got out there and read a thesis.
I mean, for some of us, yes, maybe not others.
In today's presentation, I will. Yes.
Very
So
funny.
I don't know, but I don't know.
Okay.
It's many things.
Many things. Yes,
Many
you would have spoken
things.
about many things.
I probably would have just preached on Miriam though. Miriam being
She is a prophetess.
a prophetess.
We just want to talk about Moses and the Mosaic covenant.
Yes.
So-
Moses is the big deal.
Yeah.
He's constantly the one that later prophets are compared to.
And that's the main reason we talked about Moses. Actually, and
Yeah.
that's another thing is like there's certain things that we have to talk about and there's certain things we can't talk about in 8 weeks. And so we're kind of hitting the main people, which also tends to mean that we're going to hit mostly the men, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, you only
Because-
have 20 minutes.
I have 20 minutes. I would love to
Yeah.
talk about Miriam.
But she has a little. Her part just isn't as big. She's still interesting.
She's still very interesting. There's a lot of
Um,
interesting points of
Yeah.
stuff.
And she has her own downfall too, which I was just reading about in Numbers the other day, where she questions Moses' wife. But
Anyways,
they are only human,
Yeah,
and so are we.
that's kind of the point.
Yes.
All right,
I'm sorry, I just keep going.
that's okay. We'll probably keep going this conversation, but this has been In the Foyer with Dalen and Shonda,
With
Um,
the Talitskis.
the Tolitskis. Yes, tune in next week. I will be doing the same thing, probably with Shonda, again. And then Ryan will be back after that, and we will have a less chaotic person with us. And I get to.
I am the chaos.
You are the chaos.
I am the lake.
No. So yeah, if this has just been a place, this is a place to engage and talk about all the things we didn't talk about and some of the things we did.
Leave comments.
Leave comments on.
If you want to keep chatting, hit me up.
Yes, she loves to talk about everything. I mean, so do I, but she's the extrovert. She loves human beings and needs to talk to them all the time. So if you want to do that, you can message her. She's great. But yeah, if you want to leave a comment on YouTube or on Facebook, please do. We will engage and talk as much as you want, as you like. And if not, I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on Sunday and next week.
Bye.
Bye.